Firstly, Excellency and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Firstly, I acknowledge the Datuk people of the Eora Nation upon the lands which we meet physically here today. For all those dialed in across the nation today, I pay my respects to the custodians of lands upon which you're meeting and viewing this as well. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and I also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and men who have served our nation in times of peace and war. I really appreciate the opportunity to follow up from both my great mates and compatriots in both Mark and Matt in Fleet and Forces Command. We come from very similar backgrounds, but we bring a nuanced approach to the way we need to do business, and that by and large is the sub-theme of how I'll be talking about resilience from an Air Command perspective, is actually that strength through diversity that provides us with the inherent resilience. But I'm going to start with a definition of resilience, and this is from the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Manual. Resilience is the ability of a system, community or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, adapt to, transform and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and function. Now, one could argue that in this, the centenary year of our Air Force, and thank you, Mark, for acknowledging the birthday again there, mate, that it's inherent in the Air Force's DNA to be resilient. Between its formation in 1921 through to the start of the Second World War, our then Chief of the Air Force, Sir Richard Williams, spent a majority of his time arguing the case about the retention of an independent armed service for the provision of air power. So Air Force, as part of its DNA, has always been adapting to the environment within which it existed. But critically for us, it actually comes down to one of, are we resilient by design as an ADF, and in particular as an Air Force? So what are the design criteria we need to address those attributes identified in that definition? Now for us, the ADF in itself and the Air Force and Air Command is a medium to small entity when you consider it compared to other defence forces in the world. We are therefore not a defence force of mass. And so therefore, without mass as an inherent redundant or resilient measure, how do we cope? We actually cope through resilience through quality. And critically important, our measure of success is quality. Quality of our systems and quality of our people as a resilient measure to adapt and cope to the environment as it changes over time. And as we colloquially call within Air Force, you know, it's bombs on target on time. It's actually the delivery of quality and precise effects on time. And so our true measure of resilience is our ability to deliver quality on time. So that they are pretty much the critical design criteria or principles for the Defence Force. Within Air Command, in fact, the Governor highlighted in her opening address, never before in our careers has there been such an alignment from strategy down to task in terms of what we need to do. From the Defence Strategic Update with the 3 strategic defence objectives to shape, deter, respond, through the force structure plan, which outlines major capital acquisition projects, and importantly for our government, talking about reaching out and touching others that might be our competitors within our part of the world. And then finally, the Defence Transformation Strategy, which talks about the way the Defence Force needs to reform. Said anyway, these 3 documents represent strategy, capability and reform. Within Air Command, we view those aspects about 3 key questions we need to ask ourselves. Are we relevant? Are we credible? And are we reliable? The test of relevancy is the one about are we doing what is actually expected of us? And so that's maintaining a key alignment and being attuned not only to our government and our government's expectations, but more broadly across the world. The ADF in Australia, if you consider it like a biological entity, doesn't exist in its own ecosystem. It connects with other ecosystems around. So in order to be able to adapt quickly, we need to have enough spidey sensors out there that we're attuned to the environment within which we are in, which it goes beyond just taking specific direction from government to say ADF do. ADF must also think. But in order to think and be prepared, not only do you need those spidey sensors out there from a diverse and inclusive workforce, you also need to have that from, but how far out are you looking as well? The motto within Air Command is to be alert and ready, but as we colloquially say, you can't be ready if you're looking at your shoes, you can only be ready if you're looking at ahead. So our ability to be resilient is also our ability to predict or give great military judgments about the world within which we live and those things that might be changing and how quickly we can adapt to that change. So therefore, we need to be looking sufficiently far enough ahead to give us sufficient indicators and warnings about is the system we've created remaining relevant over time. How far ahead do we look? We've got plenty of folk employed within the Department of Defence that are involved in strategy. Outside of the 10-year bracket, they're the big hands, little map type of folk. They give us the general steer about where we have a vision and where we want to point our Defence Force. And that's fantastic. We need that broader strategy and broader vision to give us a mean line of advance. For us in the force in being world, what's the force in being? That's the force that we have today because we fight with what we have, not what we wish we had or what we think we've got. That's what we deal with in the world of reality. And our world really extends out to around about 4 years from a temporal perspective. Why is it 4 years? Well, 4 years needs to be, it's sufficiently far ahead that it's real and we can actually make real changes to the way we adapt to our force, whether it's change in the way we train or new sparks of innovation and technology that we can rapidly install, or they give us the indicators of a longer lead time items that we need to develop in a broader capability development, say, hey, guess what? We can't crack that nut now, handing over other leaders in terms of broader things we need to develop beyond that. But importantly, 4 years generally goes beyond the tenures that we have in our respective positions. And that 4 years is important. We always need to look beyond our tenure to ensure that we have a connection with an evolution over time. So what is the role of the ADF? The ADF, the Chief of the Defence Force, the role of the Chief of the Defence Force is to ensure the ADF as an institution endures over time and remains relevant, credible and reliable over time. And so therefore you must always be looking ahead. And that's where Mark, Matt and I are challenged on a day-to-day perspective. Are we picking up on those changes to environment? Are we evolving? And are we attuned to those changes? How do we articulate it in a way that makes sense to our leadership? How do we articulate that in a way that makes sense to the government as well? So that's our first resilient factor, being attuned to the environment. The second theme about credibility, good at what we do. That's actually ensuring that not only do we retain the soft skills that keep us attuned to the community and part of the community, but it's the soft skills that underpin our hard edge as a Defence Force as well. And at the end of the day, as blunt as it may be, the Defence Force is the only mechanism that the Australian government has to deliver hard power. The only branch that's authorised to kill people and blow stuff up in blunt terms. And so at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we are able to do that if called to do so. It doesn't mean that our sole focus is on that, but when called to do so, we need to be prepared to do it as well. So being credible also ensures that we're providing confidence to government that we can do so. How do we test ourselves about how credible we are? Well, part of it's actually being relevant to the government and turning up to the things that they require of us. And in the last couple of years, the Defence Force might be viewed through the lens of international rescue. There's no mission, there's no task, there's no crises too big or too small that we haven't demonstrated an adaptability to cope over time. Whether that's reconstitution efforts through the Pacific nations, through disaster response, whether that has been through the national and the global pandemic and how we've coped and put our people through to that. Inherently, our job is to do what government directs, but without taking away the point that if government directs us to do those hard things, we need to be good at that as well. The third theme there is about reliability. We say what we mean and we mean what we say. And often defence has been criticised without being able to clearly articulate or having a lack of transparency exactly about what it does. Why are you spending $10,000 on a coffee machine, as an example, as a distortion from the money and investment in time and people and resource to be trained and prepared to do the difficult things that we need to do as well. But that reliability is also keeping a connection to the community and keeping connection to the taxpayer to say, but we are spending your money wisely, and this is what it brings back to bear. Now, when we joined up in the mid to late 80s and in the early 90s, the world was raging peace. And most of us lived through that. It was a wonderful environment to be in, but there was always questions about why do we need a Defence Force? Defence Force has always been like an insurance policy, right? Unless you actually are drawing upon your policy, you question why over time do you want to keep putting money towards it? So that's why we go back to theme one. We need to remain relevant. And though while those tasks might necessarily be the hard edge that we require, it keeps us relevant to our current government, and it keeps us relevant to the Australian nation as well. But the things that we never predicted, and as Matt articulated in his points for Forces Command, I don't think we could have actually predicted the incidental benefits we had of having a force deployed supporting a COVID task force. We had women and men out there interacting with the Australian community and all types of the Australian community through all socio-economic means and needs. People through distress, people through other factors going on in their lives. And it's a true testament to the women and men of the ADF that they're able to show a great level of empathy and professionalism and provide support directly to their fellow Australians. And for all those involved in the COVID task force, I think all of them would come back and say it's something that was deeply personal for them because they could see they were doing something that was benefiting Australians as well. So when the Australian populace can see that the Australian government and therefore the Australian Defence Force is there supporting itself, it provides the Australian people a level of confidence that the Defence Force is actually doing a good job and it actually represents the best of who we are. And therefore, that also provides a level of confidence about how capable, adaptable and resilient the nation is. And so whilst the military is just one part of national power, it is the most visible part of national power from a human dynamic perspective. And the level of confidence that provides from a national point of view about us as a nation from an identity perspective is absolutely crucial. And the Defence Force's reformation over the last 10 to 15 years in particular, from a workforce perspective, from a diversity and inclusivity perspective as well. I look at the Air Force today, and I'll steal a quote from a mate of mine, the former Deputy Chief of Army, Changi Rawlins, or I think he's still in the job right now. His quote was, you know, the army we have today is the army he wished he joined. And I have a similar view about the Air Force I'm in today. The Air Force we're in today is kind of like the Air Force I wish I joined. We're a far more professional outfit, we're attuned, we understand, but we are resilient in a way that demonstrates confidence and trust back to the Australian people. But where's your evidence of that? Well, I'll go back a few years. The first vignette is late August 2014. We were just on the backward swing of the first peace dividend out of Afghanistan. The world was going into its next phase of raging peace, and then Iraq turned sideways. At that particular point, the Australian government took a determination that we needed to come to the aid of Iraq in their collective self-defence. And what was colloquially, or well, not colloquially, what was titled Operation Okra was initiated. Within Air Command in September 2014, we were given what normally for that type of mission set, we would have required a minimum of 35 days notice to move, to prepare our forces, train for the mission, certify and get going. As the operational commander at that point, I had a call from my chief saying, congratulations, Vinny, we've got 28 days to go. I go, whew, that's going to be tight. 48 hours later, he gave me a call. It's now 14 days. I go, well, that's even going to be tighter. 24 hours passed. He goes, it's now 7 days. Wow, that's going to be difficult. Now, we end up deploying an air task group as part of that joint force that encompassed the KC-30, 6 Super Hornets and the E-7. So we're actually, our force development had actually foreseen a need for us to be more self-sustained and reliant. So we actually up stumps and moved ourselves to the Middle East within 7 days. Astonishing. Within an additional 7 days after the 14-day point from when we were given notice, we were actually operating within the theatre itself. Extraordinary. Seamlessly tapped straight into that operation. Within 21 days of that notice, still that is 14 days inside of when we should have been given notice to move, at the 21-day point, we dropped our first weapon on our first target. Now that's extraordinary, and that couldn't have happened without the foresight of not only the capability development, but the way we inherently trained to be adaptable and capable to actually sequence in when we need to do it at whatever time. So that's the first demonstration of the hard edge of how your defence force is currently postured. The second example, as Matt's put out, is most recently with the non-combatant evacuation operation we had most recently in Afghanistan. And it's a true credit to the women and men directly involved in that they have changed the lives of 4,100 Afghanis. Changed the lives of 4,100 Afghanis, and no doubt the second and third order effects go into the tens of thousands of the indirect benefits that have applied associated with that. But it was Friday the 13th, right? Friday the 13th of August, we got the call that it's on. And within 36 hours, we actually had personnel from a joint force moving from this nation to get up and running. Now, why was that extraordinary at that time? Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been living in a COVID environment for the last 18 months. So we actually had a complete workforce that was actually not physically at work. They were distributed, working from home, doing homeschooling. We had a lot of our women and men deployed to the COVID task force in support of that as well. But we were able to gather them up and deploy a force forward in that 36-hour window. Absolutely astonishing. As a minor segue there, over the preceding 2 years of operations through COVID, Air Force and Air Mobility Group, you know, the C-17s, KC-30s, our C-130s, our C-27s. The nature of air power is that we move, and we move between states and internationally. Every time we moved internationally between states, we incurred a quarantine bill based upon each state's restrictions. As of today, Air Command alone has accumulated over 200 years worth of human time in quarantine alone. And so leading up to that point on August the 13th, Friday the 13th, we had this accumulated fatigue of people repeatedly going into and out of quarantine, with one of our highest lead humans having completed 160 days worth of quarantine in 1 calendar year. So we had been going on, we had a very attuned workforce. We knew who was capable and who wasn't, and how we would get up and running. So the fact within 36 hours of that task, we're up and running and we deployed was extraordinary. Also given the fact that that workforce had to come across from states as well. So they couldn't even concentrate together before they deployed. They all consolidated at our Middle East base in Minhad. They got together, they adapted, and you know, as they say, the rest is history. once again, which should underpin the confidence we have in not only the quality of the process we have, but the quality of the humans we have to be able to rapidly adapt and adjust. Where are we going moving forward, and what's important for us? There's a good book by a guy called Ed Catmull, who is the president of Pixar and Disney Animation. When I was going through an airport one day, back in the days when you could fly, I just wanted something to read on the way through there. And as I went through the newsagent, there was a book there and had a picture of Buzz Lightyear on the front. I go, well, that should be light reading. I'll grab that one, because I wasn't in for an in-depth reading at that point. Now, Ed Catmull, who started up Pixar Animation, the ones that were responsible for Toy Story, he actually did an analysis about what made Pixar successful and actually what made big companies successful, but importantly, what actually made big companies at the heights of their power fail as well. And here's the thing. When Pixar developed Toy Story, it was incredible, right? And it was a world-leading product. They went to develop Toy Story 2. They thought they had a repeatable process, and they thought they actually had things that they could actually they had a winning formula. They almost broke their company because what they failed to recognise was, as a first of type event, all their employees were willing to do whatever was necessary to actually make that successful. And so the key part for us from a resilience perspective is we need to always be checking our homework. Just because an entity or an event was successful, we need to understand and analyse the reasons why it was successful, and is it actually repeatable and sustainable over time. And so the true test of how resilient we are as a nation is checking our own homework. It's great to get the platitudes and pats on the back, but the key part that we've always taken, and certainly I take home, is that you're always blind to something that's going wrong. It's just your ability to see it. And that's the key part for us being resilient as a nation. Are we looking deliberately at the things that we know aren't working? And are we looking hard enough and asking ourselves the tough questions about, are we truly resilient and are we adaptable as well? So we need from time to time, not just we need to check our own homework, but equally important, we need to get others to check our homework as well. So that's been a bit of a journey through left and right field as looked through the eyes of the Air Commander. What I tried to outline to you folks today, and I thank you for your time, is that we are completely aligned within the Defence Force about what's necessary. We have wonderful women and men of whom you should all be proud of as well. They're extremely capable, but the keys to our success is always being attuned to our environment. Our strength through diversity, our strength through insights, our strength through partnerships with our nearer nations. And that's the final point I'd say as well. We live in a complete ecosystem that we need to be attuned to what's going on elsewhere. One of the things we have in the fighter community, when we talk about how do you gain situational awareness, you gain most situational awareness by listening, not by talking. So we say when we engage with their region, we need big ears and little mouth. And so we need to be attuned to what really matters to those within our region to work out ways that we can actually best partner with them as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for the opportunity to present here today. Hopefully we've presented you with an opportunity to glean across the ADF, but hopefully what you've seen is that you've got a very capable ADF who aren't resting on our laurels, and we're always willing to adapt and change.